A warm welcome to episode 45 of Lost for Words. I am your host Jason, and this week I am joined by Matt Ventisei, who is running as the Conservative candidate for this May's local elections in the Greater Pollock ward of Glasgow City Council. Matt comes on to discuss the formation of his political beliefs. We go all in on the state of Glasgow under the current SNP administration, and he talks me through his party's, as well as his own, plans for change in the next council term. A quick housekeeping note before we get started. Please leave a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts, whether that be Apple, Google, Spotify, Podbean, or any other platform. It's the best way the podcast can grow and better content can be produced for you, the listener. It's your listening experience that matters the most. But enough from me, now on to today's episode of Lost for Words. Right, firstly, you are Conservative. You're also going to be standing as a Conservative councillor, but why are you a Conservative? Where do your party values come from?
To begin, I'm just over the years I've seen how much the council's deteriorated under the SNP, and obviously living in the Glasgow Council area myself, I live in the Cardonald ward, so just away from the Pollock ward, and I've seen firsthand, especially growing up in Thornley Bank and stuff, how things have changed over the years, for the worse. For example, most recently, obviously, the litter, the bins been changing, the fly tipping, the potholes, and it's not just that. There's other things like community halls disappearing, local businesses suffering. There used to be so many good things in a community, and now it just seems to be it's just houses and what's left in the shops. And I think the only way to change that is by working with the Glasgow Conservatives, because they won't seem to be the only party who are willing to actually stand up and fight this point, unlike other parties who I believe are just not really caring. And I think this is going to be a good election campaign, because I think there's so much more we can offer, unlike some other parties. And I think that's what people want, hopefully.
When did you realise you were a Conservative? What age were you when you joined the party?
I joined the party just over a year ago, but I've been voting Conservative since I could actually vote. So when did I start voting? 7 years, 8 years.
See, when people say it's often a lefty type tripe, an SNP thing. These people say these things to pat themselves on the back. But the idea of voting Tories disgusting, and how could you ever do it? What would your stock response be to someone that says that?
Like I don't believe the Tories are all bad. Like every party's got its flaws and its good points and its bad points. And I think when you look at it as council wise, the Tories are doing a lot more than the SNP. Like they're doing things for the better. I know the SNP think cutting bins is for the better, but really is it? Because looking at the state of our areas now, then no. So I think people need to just I feel people always just live in the past, and it's time to move forward and realise yeah, every party's got good and bad things, but we need to kind of look at the good things a bit more detailed rather than just focusing on the previous bad points.
What was your experience of the first independence referendum? The common belief is that most young people at that time, we would have been young, not so much young now, but most young people at that time would have voted yes. You, I would assume, was someone that voted no. What was your experience of it, and being in a quote unquote minority amongst your peers, so to speak?
Like a lot of my friends felt the same way as me, that thinking about it, no was probably the best way to do it. And the only people I really knew that wanted the yes were the older people, not really people my age, because I think a lot of people like me feared what it would do for our futures.
What would you think would it have done for our futures? Had that happened, how much worse would things be than? So I think people like to say
But
that we're in a bad place now, but how much worse would it have been? Could it have been?
I think if we went independent, and especially after the pandemic, I don't think we would have had the vaccines, we wouldn't have had the furlough. I think we would have struggled really badly. So it's like things like that that have been a bit of an eye opener for me.
Yeah, I agree. Even as I'd say I would definitely politically neutral, but the furlough scheme I think is the greatest thing that has happened fiscally in this country in over half a century, quite comfortably. That was it. Rishi Sunak and the people down there played the blinder because it kept everyone on their feet. That it was like a safety net that would not and could not have happened, I think, in an independent Scotland.
Yeah, I think the furloughs definitely saved a lot of people's jobs, especially in Scotland. Like it saved mine, it saved like so many, and I think so many businesses as well have survived thanks to the furlough scheme. And I think obviously if we were independent, we would never have had that. It would have been completely different up here for sure.
Well, you got involved in the party a year ago. Would that have been in the height of the pandemic?
Yeah, that's when I joined them during the pandemic. It was something I've always wanted to do is like join, but I never really knew how to do it. And then one day I just decided find out how to do it and let's just do it.
And what was your involvement like to start with? How were you greeted? What happened? How were you integrated into the Glasgow Conservatives?
So I kind of went to the Glasgow Conservatives. Well, I joined the Conservatives, and then during the whole pandemic, I don't know what it was. It made me open my eyes a bit more, and I thought, you know what, I want to make a difference, and I want to stand for council. I think obviously because the election happened during the, the pandemic, that kind of made me sway into thinking about it because obviously there's nothing really else to think about other than an election and COVID. And that's when I realised like I want to do something for my local area. I want to do something for the area I work in. And I think the only way to do that is by joining a party I believe will help me do that. And that was the Glasgow Conservatives. And then obviously during the election just passed, we were doing phone calls and stuff with the Tories to try and get as many MSPs elected. So that was like my first taste of a campaign. And it got me geared up and made me think, well, do you know what? This is what I want to do come the next council election.
I think the general gist is that the pandemic offers an almost incumbency benefit because people were maybe more hesitant to vote out the people who they perceive to have protected them during the pandemic. Did you find that as someone who was speaking to people that the SNP maybe got a lot of soft votes from people who respected what they did for seeing them through the worst of the coronavirus pandemic?
There was a couple of people who would have said something similar, but like, I totally do agree on that front because I do think obviously Nicola Sturgeon was on TV every single day more or less. So
Yeah,
people
yeah.
it
Uh-huh.
became a household name like compared to what it would have been 5 years ago. So I think because she was basically taking what Down South were doing for the UK and making it her own, I think that made her look like she was doing everything out her way, and that made them get more like soft voters, as you say. Maybe people who would have voted Labour were voting for the SNP, etc., just because they felt like Nicola Sturgeon had saved them, when really that wasn't really the case, to be fair.
Why do you think the result of that Scottish Parliament election does not mandate a second independence referendum?
I think going by the recent polls online, it just goes to show you that I think it's one of the things. It's a once in a lifetime thing. It's been, it's gone. It's not happened. It was like Brexit. I think looking at what was who was elected, and how the SNP never got the majority, just it speaks volumes. And I think people are, I think now, especially because of the pandemic, people are bored of hearing of independence this, independence that. And I think people are beginning to realise now as well that without the UK government, Scotland would have been screwed during this whole pandemic.
What do you make of? I seen the news today that, just even in recent times, that they're planning to bolster or reboot, whatever you call it, the independence campaign from spring 2023. So, say in about a year and a bit's time. What do you make of that? Is that a callous thing to be doing while you're still fighting COVID?
I think it's a ridiculous thing to do during the pandemic. I mean, they could be spending that money in the council for a start. They could be spending it in our schools and the NHS. They could be spending it on a lot more things other than something that's never going to happen. I think it's just maybe their way of like like fishing. If we say we're going to do this, we'll get more votes of people who want it, type thing. So I think it's all to do with the timing and the planning of it all. I think it's obviously I don't see it ever happening, but I think this is their way of trying to get some more votes in the council elections, and just to make people believe that something is going to happen and just a way of wasting money.
Yeah, because I think they're now like my perception of them is that it's interesting. They have been in power now since 2007. Now we were leaving primary school at that time, and now we are well
Yeah,
into adulthood. They have been the dominant party, and I think they dangle the carrot to get the votes. But what have they done? Certainly since Indy Ref 1, sorry. What have they done to actually get that going? It's almost as though I think it deep down, if you to whisper it, it suits Sturgeon to just dangle the carrot because it buys time, and time is power. Whereas I think, say they pushed for it, they got it into Ref 2 and it were to lose, then where does she and where do they go from there? It's good for them to just keep people hoping rather than the
yeah. I
reality
think
of
that
it.
I think deep down that she's maybe a bit scared to actually do it because the answer will possibly be a high no, and I think that is the issue as well. I think they're worried that the result will never be a yes, and they know they're going to look like fools for wasting all this money for something that everyone's going to say no to. Well, a majority of people might say no to.
If you had to say one positive thing about Nicola Sturgeon and the SNB's handling of the pandemic, what would you say? You might have to dig deep for this one, but if you had to give them one pat on the back, what would it be?
See, for somebody who runs a pub, that makes this one a really hard one to answer. If I'm honest with you, I think because they've worked with the UK government to get the vaccines out there, I would give them that credit. But that is obviously thanks to the UK government. But it's a hard one. I don't really know. I couldn't really answer that, to be truthful.
Are you a publican? Is that right? Do you run a pub?
Yeah, I work for a chain running a
Yeah.
pub in the Pollock area. The area I'm standing for.
So I guess you would have been more impacted by the, the coronavirus measures than most. Probably, I would say that you were impacted the worst by it. 'Cause I think hospitality, especially in pubs as well,
Oh,
alcohol taking a beating. I think,
see,
especially in Glasgow, we were in that lockdown for the longest. I think anywhere in the UK from the 9th of
I think
October until June.
I don't know what it is. It just seems like the SNP have an issue with alcohol and hospitality. I mean, I think hospitality has suffered an absolute lot during this pandemic. I mean, remember the rules last year at Christmas time? Our busiest, what could have been busiest time pre-COVID, or the year before last even. We weren't allowed to play music. We weren't allowed to
Yeah,
open past 6 o'clock. We weren't allowed to serve alcohol.
yeah.
It was it was all just ridiculous. I mean, I don't know what the issue is with hospitality. I mean, it's no different than going to a supermarket, but there's more stricter rules in place in hospitality where there was obviously at the height of the pandemic. We had one-way systems. You had to wear masks, track and trace. You had to do like the track and trace was a biggie for me, especially when you go to a supermarket. You didn't have to do it, but to go in a pub, you did, and yet we were the ones being punished. We were taking good measures to make pubs safe with social distancing and stuff. You didn't really get that in a supermarket, and that's what really annoyed me the most. It was like you can have a free for all down the road, but you can't go out for a socially distanced meal with your family who you live with because these silly rules. And there's no. I'm quite lucky. I work for a chain, but it's the smaller independent places that I really did feel for. Like a lot of them have closed due to the pandemic, and obviously the different rules up here. And it's just a shame to see so many empty buildings and like so many people losing jobs in hospitality because of the handling of it all. It's a real shame. And pubs are needed in communities because at the end of the day, they're places people go to meet up. Like older people go there to see their friends. It's just a right blow to communities and also businesses.
I think as well, like when the football first came back, like it was last week, so say about 2 weeks ago today, actually, yeah.
Aye, aye.
And you could have went to Celtic Park or Ibrox at that time, and yet you couldn't go to the pub beforehand without it being table service. So it was insanity. So
Yeah.
say you had, if are you a Rangers fan?
Yeah, yeah.
Right, so say whichever, take your pub with the nearest pub that's in the Govan Ibrox area. You could be in there, you could be in Ibrox, 50,000 people, Rangers got a goal, you're cuddling, you're jumping about, whatever. But then when you leave at 4:45, You can't quickly jump in somewhere and grab a pint without it being table service. So you're allowed in
No,
a place with 50,000 people, but then pubs get a limited capacity. The pub that can only hold 75, 80 people. It's didn't make any sense. And
it really didn't. And you could sit in a bus with like go on a first bus and sit right next to a random, but you couldn't sit next to a random in a pub. It was. I don't really know what goes through their heads, and I don't know how they get away with it. I really, honestly, don't. It does boil my blood. That one does really get to me.
what would you say was the most wacky rule? Because I think when I think of the pandemic, it was the no music thing. Because as though you're sitting in the pub, blast the jukebox, then the virus is going to spread more potently.
I think that has to be that. That's what I would have picked the music in Scotland. I just think that was like the most bizarre and unnecessary rule, and also the closing at 6 o'clock and not serving alcohol. I just think was madness, absolute madness of a rule.
Next one, then, just on the a different aspect of the COVID handling. What would you say was one criticism that you had of Nicola Sturgeon's handling apart from hospitality?
I'd probably say maybe the care home scandals, the whole care home fiascos. I think the handling of COVID in the care homes has got to be one of the highly criticised moments during the pandemic.
Especially at the beginning when they just were putting the patients straight back in
Yeah,
without testing them at first and stuff as well, and then wondering why the death rate was so high. It's almost masking the true statistics.
but the thing is, they don't get held account for this. It's like, okay, that's it, and it's away. It doesn't matter. Like media places don't seem to like bring it up. It just seems to be like a distant memory now. That happened a month ago, but it's okay. We forgive and forget, and I think that's what's wrong. We shouldn't be forgiving and forgetting. We should be fighting for why did this happen and why did this have to suffer in people's mental health. It just seems to be like there's not enough fighting from media and other things. There doesn't seem to be enough holding them to account in my eyes. I mean, people tweet them all day long, but do you think they really read their tweets?
Then honing in on Glasgow, I think we could be here for a long time, but describe describe your experience of watching our city over the last 5 years.
Been horrible. Like the city centre for a start used to be such a good place for a night out. You understand, you're the same age as me. Like you'd go out to the city centre 5, 6 years ago and it'd be a good night out. Now it just seems to be rubbish. There's obviously no taxis to get home because obviously so many taxi drivers are back because of not getting funding during the pandemic. Then also you've got like there's all the bars that have shut, all the empty buildings. Like Glasgow is just a complete ghost town in my eyes now. And especially seeing like for shopping and stuff, the city centre just doesn't seem to be the kind of place you want to go now. And then when you move into the local communities, you just see litter everywhere, overflowing bins. And it's not that. I had to go through 4 tyres last year thanks to the potholes. It's not just my driving, it's the potholes. And when you see it over the years and you see old pictures, you think, how did we ever get into such a mess? And it's quite heartbreaking to see if you're honest. And this is like an area like where my kids are going to grow up in, and everyone else has got kids of our age and stuff. It's not nice to know that the future are going to grow up in this compared to what we had 5, 10 years ago. It's really not nice. The city is an absolute riot, and it needs change.
I think you'll find, Matt, it needs a little spruce up, and it's not. That's all it needs. Just a little bit of sparkle dust and just a little sprucing up.
Absolutely. A wee polish and a wee brush, you'll never notice.
What would you say? Like people that would then turn around and say, people that are in the yellow rosettes that would say to you, Glasgow suffers from problems that are suffered by other cities. What's your response to that?
Well, I think that's a lot of rubbish because I was down in England for a wedding the other day, and like the area I was in, like when you're in Glasgow, you can spot a pothole every couple of minutes. Down there, couldn't spot a pothole at all. It was clean, it was inviting. So it's completely different up here. Like, I feel when you get off a train at Central Station, you just walk into a horrible, horrible area because there's just nothing there. It's dull, it's depressing. And why is that? It's because of all the cuts the SNP have made to the local authorities. like the bins is a good one because there was no need to change the bins during a pandemic when everyone was at home to 3 weekly for your general waste. It's madness. Like, I just think they can't keep blaming down south. They need to be held account, and that's one thing I'm going to be doing if I do get elected as councillor.
I think between the bins and then quickly followed by the bulk uplift charge, you're essentially then putting it's a poverty thing because say people that live in, say most people on low incomes live in, for example, tenement buildings, then those tenement buildings you're restricted on space anyway, which then I think in a pandemic you're using your house more, so you're going to have more waste. To then put a charge on that discriminates against those who don't have that money, which then in turn, if you don't have the money, you would turn to fly tipping. I think
Well, this is it.
that was a really poor choice.
It's a snowball effect, and see if something's not broken, you don't need to fix it. And I don't understand why they had to introduce a bulk uplift charge. Why they had to change the bins? There's no reasoning behind it. The states to make people recycle more, but that only works if your recycling bins get emptied when they're meant to get emptied. And there's been 4 or 5 times mine that haven't been emptied, and I'm having to chase the council to get them emptied. And it's like, why are we then having our general waste bins changed to help us recycle, but you're not helping us recycle because you're not emptying our bins? It's just a snowball effect, and it's something that does need to be scrapped and redone. It can't continue like this because the city's going to just look like one big bin if this continues.
Yeah, I think if you scale back the green bin collection, you have to then push forward the blue bin. If you want to encourage recycling, you have to make it so that recycling occurs more frequently. Because even 2 weeks for the blue bin, I would say that I've become much better at it's like siphoning through things compared to what it used to be. But 2 weeks, even your blue bin can get sticky, can get like touchy. It can get close to the bone, and
so this is it. And it's like, it's when in your green bin, your nappies and all that are in that green bin for 3 weeks. It's disgusting. It's a head hazard to my eyes. I just don't agree. And the people I really do feel sorry for is the people who actually work in the cleansing department, like the bin men, the bin ladies. Like, it's them I feel sorry for the most because their job's a lot harder now, carrying heavier bins and overflowing bins to the truck because of these cuts. And I don't think it's fair on them at all.
When did you decide that you're going to stand?
It was the middle of last year. I was coming and hot about the idea, and then I emailed in, and then I got selected in December, just past there, December 21, that I'd be standing. And it's an area that I work in and I spent most of my childhood in, so it's quite an exciting opportunity.
How would you describe Pollock to someone who wasn't familiar with
it? Definitely not as bad as what it used to be. Things are obviously deteriorating because of the council cuts, and it once was an area with a name, but now it has had a bit of a revamp, and it does look a lot nicer and fresher. And obviously, it's not just Pollock; it's the Greater Pollock ward, so you've got Crookston and stuff like that in that ward now as well. And it is a lovely ward. Like, it'd be a ward I'd be more than happy to represent. From seeing it changing over the years, like, it is majorly different to what it was.
Is that a ward with 3 or 4 councillors?
4. There's 2 Labour and 2 SNP.
And how do you foresee your prospects of dethroning one of them? Like, who would you be more confident of unseating, a Labour or an SNP?
Tough one because I think it's going to go either way. This campaign, hopefully, it's an SNP one we take over because the 2 of them are actually standing down, which is interesting. I wonder if that's because of the shambles the council's becoming, or for other reasons. But it is an area where I feel like the Conservatives could hopefully gain, especially being somebody who's been brought up in the area next door and also somebody who hung about and works in that area. I feel like we have a chance, hopefully, especially with the 5-point plan, to knock one of them off their seats and take a seat.
Is that where Rhiannon Spear is?
That's the one.
Well, must help then that you've got someone who she's a bit of a keyboard warrior. I think she if she spent a bit less time on Twitter and spent more time paying her council tax, then
Yeah. They're
uh,
all keyboard warriors. Like for instance, the other day on Twitter, John Mason was tweeting saying that the money they got given by the UK government for councils has been spent on the Scottish Health Service, and I said, "Well, can you prove it?" And he won't reply because he knows he can't prove it because he knows they spent that money on a lot of rubbish. And it just makes you wonder like, how these people are in the position they're in.
he's a special one. He's a special
Oh yeah,
one that he. I think you wonder how he's my MS. I live in Baillieston, so that's my like he's my
right.
MSP, and you think to yourself sometimes, why are the SNP keep putting him forward? Why surely there must be there must be someone there must be someone who isn't going to score the multiple own goals. You know what I mean? It's just that you think there must be some young blood in the SNP that could surely come in and not say that some of the wacky stuff that he comes out with.
You would think, wouldn't you? You
You
would
would
think.
you would think, but and it's just I think he's I seen him today and he was saying that the fire alarm, the smoke alarm thing that's coming in that he
Oh
got,
yeah.
he's spent £142. Think it was really reasonable. Then people are coming back saying that's somebody's heating for a month. Do you know what I mean? And it's just just tone. He's tone
Yeah.
deaf. Like he's tone
You
deafness
wonder if
personified.
he'll be using the taxpayers' money to pay for them anyway. That's for sure. If we honest expenses at the end of the year.
Uh, run me through the 5 point plan then. What are the Glasgow Tories going to offer that the SNP don't?
So we've got our 5 point plan, and then I've also got like my own plan and things I want to do. But the 5 point plan is we want to scrap the bulk uplift charge, which is introduced by the SNP for obvious reasons, and then that falls into reversing the bin cuts fortnightly. So that's the two out of the five so far. Then we want to invest over £1 million into, £10 million into the frontline cleansing staff over a council term. And then we want to get rid of the garden waste charge as well. And last but not least, set up an environmental enforcement team to help fight the fly tipping, which would not occur if we get rid of the bulk uplift charges and reverse the bin collections.
What will you bring to the Greater Pollock Council ward?
Well, firstly, having children of my own, I'm tired of taking them to like rundown parks because all the local parks are rusty, full of broken equipment. And as a councillor, I'd want to get funding to improve local parks in the areas because these parks are great for kids and adults, and it's good to get exercise in them. And it's also good for your mental health, especially after 2 years being locked up. It would be nice to go to a nice, inviting park. And talking about revamping the parks in areas in the constituency where there's like empty wasteland or like buildings that are just lying there deserted, I'd want to do something to make them more enjoyable for the community rather than just being an eyesore. So I'd want to make them like a community garden where adults and younger people could go and visit to enjoy nature, just to get outdoors away from their home, just to go and get peace and quiet. Um, and also, I want to spend more money and bring back community centres because you can't really beat a youth centre or a community centre in the heart of your community because one, it's good for people in like all different ages, from young to older people, because it helps you meet new people. It gets children off the streets and hanging out in a nice, fresh, clean, warm environment. They can learn life skills. And I used to go to like, a youth club with my friends every Tuesday night when I was like 9 and 10. And, you know, we had great nights. Like you'd have a pool night, you'd have a barbecue night. There was always something different to look forward to. And I don't think we get that anymore in this day and age. And it's something that communities need to fight for. And it's something I would fight for to bring back. And as well, when I was younger, when I lived in Thornley, the King George V Park in Ardennes used to have these great fetes and family fun days. And I've not seen one since I was, again, 9 or 10. And I think this is something that communities are missing because it's such a good thing for our local community to have. And it's something that, using my experience of like creating events for my business and stuff, it's something I would, once again, if elected, would happily sort out and fight to do. And speeding as well, and local communities just now are constantly finding the start that again. And speeding as well in local communities, it seems to be a reoccurring nightmare. And apart from the obvious dangers as to why, it just makes communities noisy and unsafe. And I'd like to invest money installing measures in areas that are experiencing that problem to make them a little bit more safer for both the drivers and the pedestrians. Never say that word. So that's things I want to do as well if I'm elected as a local councillor in the Pollock area.
What feedback have you been getting from residents on the doorsteps?
A lot of them are concerned about the waste and the bulk uplift charges. That seems to be the main one, followed by the potholes, because I think people are sick of wasting money. If it's not on a bulk uplift charge, they're wasting their money on new tyres. And I think it has been a bit of an eye-opener for people, especially people who voted SNP as well. I think it's something in every doorstep you go to. It's definitely a main talking point.
If you were to be elected, what would it mean to you to represent the Greater Pollock area?
It'd mean an awful lot because it's something I'm really wanting to do, and it's something I would be passionate in doing. I wouldn't be one of these councillors that, as you can see in the local area this now, are just getting the pay packet to do nothing but destroy the area. I'd be doing something worthwhile, and I would definitely make a change. And it'd be a huge honour to be a councillor for the Pollock ward.
And if the Conservatives make inroads and you up your number of councillors, how would you be holding the SNP to account? Or would you form a coalition with another party if it meant keeping the SNP out?
I think the Conservatives have tried to work with Labour and stuff, and Labour seem to be against the idea because they want to work with the SNP. So I think the only way to get the SNP out is by voting for your local Glasgow Conservatives and Unionist candidate in the upcoming election. That's the only way we can really get rid of the SNP and make a statement.
And what would you say to people who... I think it's an important thing to just, in a voter fairness thing, people who will treat this local election as a quasi-general election. What is your advice to someone who would just vote SNP because they always vote SNP without understanding the nuances of a local election? What's your message to them?
They need to take a step back. You need to have a look, read the leaflet to get through your door, and remember that the council elections are completely different to the parliamentary elections, completely different. It's all about local issues and things in your local area, and you need to remember that. You're not, just because somebody's standing for the SNP does not mean they're going to do a good job in your local area. So it's definitely a huge difference, and you need to really read into it. You can't just be voting for the same party. If you want change in your area, then you might need to change who you vote for.
And that's a wrap. A massive thank you to this week's guest for coming on to the show. I hope you all enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed chatting. All of the relevant social media accounts can be found in the show notes. The usual bits and pieces from me to see you out. The best way to keep up to date with the latest goings on relating to Lost for Words is to follow using the handle @LostForWordsPod on both Twitter and Instagram. Send a message on either Twitter or Instagram if you have anything you'd like to ask a guest, or for a guest suggestion, or even just to leave any feedback. The best way to support the show is to hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts, and if you use an Apple device, a 5-star review in the podcast app would be amazing. If you like what you hear, tell someone. Word of mouth also helps us to grow. Finally, to round off, all of your support and continued listening is genuinely appreciated. It means a lot to me to have you on this journey too. I am your host Jason, and I hope to have you back next week for another episode of the Lost for Words podcast.